Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Ending Explain. My name is John here on Burns Reviews, and in honor of the new film X, we decided to go back and take a look at the first film that was put out by Ty West that made his mark. It wasn't his first film, but it was his first hit, called The House of the Devil, starring Jocelin Donahue, Greta Gerwig, Tom Noonan, Mary Woronov, AJ Bowen, and Dee Wallace. But before we begin, if you could, be sure to give the video a thumbs up so that the YouTube algorithm doesn't shoot this video in the face in a cemetery parking lot. Also, just a heads up, there are going to be a lot of spoilers for The House of the Devil, so if you've never seen The House of the Devil, here's your warning. With that said, let's plug in an old Walkman and pop some 80s music as we talk about The House of the Devil. The House of the Devil came out on October 30th, 2009 on video on demand, as well as given a limited release in a few select theaters. All things considered, Devil was a financial flop, grossing only $101,000 against a modest budget of $900. Despite the fact that many critics who saw it claimed it to be one of the best horror films of the decade, it was only through word of mouth and streaming did the film find a cult classic following. It seemed that the slow burn film that was inspired by the 80s came a little too early for modern audiences to sink their teeth into. Back in 2009, when the horror genre seemed to be more infused with more action, comedy, or torture films such as Saw or Hostel, it wouldn't be years until moody atmospheric films from A24 would be in style. So in a lot of ways, it was way ahead of its time. The film builds at a slow, methodical pace, before finally rewarding its audience with a balls-to-the-wall, insane third act. The film makes great use of satanic panic of the 1980s, when people believed in the existence of dangerous Satan-worshipping cults during that era. House plays off of that notion and tries to convince us that the events seen might actually be true, as transparent from the opening title card, very similar to the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, a film that Ty West seems to pay homage to in several of his films, such as X and the upcoming Pearl. Speaking of which, if you want to know more about Pearl, I have a trailer breakdown right here. It fully goes through the whole thing. You can't actually watch the trailer online, but I do have photos from that trailer that somebody did post at one point and then they took it down. My video is still up. If you want to know more about it, click the link down below. But be warned, as it does contain spoilers for the movie X. Taking place in the 1980s, the film was shot on 16mm, giving it a retro look that matched the aesthetic of the decade. Characters have feathered hair. Samantha is seen rocking a 1980s Walkman. We hear songs such as Greg Kihn's Band, the Breakup song, and The Fix's One Thing Leads to Another, which leads me to believe that specifically, I think the movie takes place in 1983. And oh my god, the camera zooms. Going against everything that they teach you in film school, West often has the camera zoom in on characters, rather than dolly in, which is more common in films today. One of the biggest signifiers is the opening and closing credits, which look great, but is also very specific to that time. I must admit though, it's pretty rad though. I love how we open on Samantha, she thinks she's gonna get this new apartment, everything's going great, and then BAM! Title card! You're gonna die! It's great. So just to quickly recap, the film follows a broke sophomore student named Sam, who decides to take a job as a babysitter for $400 for the night so she can afford to pay for her first month's rent on a new apartment that she's trying to obtain from E.T.'s mom. Things take a turn though when we find out the babysitting job doesn't involve watching a child. Instead, she is asked to stay in the house and make sure nothing happens to an unseen character called Mother, who doesn't require any attention and doesn't even have to be seen, but the job is to just stay in the house in case the worst does happen. And she does, despite the many red flags that are thrown her way. Tom Noonan does a lot of shady stuff. Let's count them off, shall we? Number 1, he stands her up when they plan to meet for an interview. Number 2, he lied about it being a babysitting job.
You see, we actually don't have a child.
Number 3, he does not allow her best friend to stay with her in the house. Number 4, he pays $400 when the original agreement was $100, which in itself was doubled because he stood her up. It was originally going to be $50. And number 5, he's just downright weird. He uses a lot of these weird polite expressions like a guy that's heavily medicated on downers. The whole thing is just shady. But because Sam wants to get away from her messy and horny roommate, she agrees to it anyway.
It's too good to be true.
Did you ever think it is too good to be true?
Right? And it is, because as we find out later, the Ullmans are actually part of a satanic cult that want to bring forth the Antichrist. Hail Satan! Her friend Megan leaves her there, but is killed by Mr. Ullman's son, Victor, when she pulls into a cemetery to have a cigarette. Why is she pulled into a cemetery to have a cigarette? Unclear, because the movie had to happen, damn it. Movie's got a movie. It's also not very clear why AJ Bowen's character would be just hanging out in a cemetery. alone, with a handgun, on the off chance that someone would drive by, but it's okay, because what the scene lacks in logic, it makes up for with absolute shock value, as Victor unexpectedly blows Lady Bird's head off across the windshield. Would a handgun actually do that? Absolutely not. But the practical effect looks really cool, and I'm for it. From there, honestly, a lot of nothing happens. We spend nearly an hour of the film watching Sam snoop around an empty house, psyching herself out over bumps you hear in the night. But for what it lacks in story, it does make up for with atmosphere. We've all had that feeling of waking up at 2 in the morning and hearing a sound and wondering what it was. Seeing a shadow and thinking that it's more, but it's just a chair with your laundry on it. We've all had that feeling of paranoia, and Ty West is tapping into it. And it's also a film that never lets up. There's no jump scares, there's no way to break the tension, there's no comic relief. This movie will grab you by the throat, keep you on the edge of your seat, and hold you there, which is kind of great. She does find a photograph of the original owners of the car parked in the driveway, but none of that really matters, as by the time she starts to piece it all together, she's already eaten the pizza that's been roofied, and she wakes up to find that she's tied up. From there, the family of 3 comes out dressed in black robes, and we finally meet Mother, who is simply credited as being Demon. They make the sign of the devil on her stomach, which in turn impregnates her with the Antichrist. She kills most of them with the exception of Mr. Ullman, who tells her that the process is almost complete. To avoid giving birth to the demon spawn though, she opts instead to kill herself by shooting herself in the head. This though of course does not work, as we see her in a hospital room, head bandaged up and in a coma. A nurse walks in to comfort her and tells her that she's going to be okay, that the both of them will be. Implying that not only is she still pregnant, but most likely the devil inside of her is what saved her from shooting herself in the head, which is wild, not to mention incredibly bleak. So what does this all mean? Well, despite the heavy homage to Rosemary's Baby and all things going on in the 80s, the film deals heavily with the themes of what was actually going on during that time. Back in the 1980s, North America was going through a wave of paranoia that was based around satanic panic. The belief that devil worshippers were the cause behind children being abducted and abused. Daycare owners especially. The big one being the McMartin preschool case. It was a crazy time. A lot of innocent people were sentenced to jail for up to 17 years for crimes that they didn't even commit. But because the media made such a craze of these allegations, the charges would often stick with very little due process. It was the Reagan years, where conservatism and paranoia were at an all-time high. Parents were afraid that these cults were infiltrating all outlets of media and corrupting their children. That games like Dungeons & Dragons and bands like Kiss and Black Sabbath were somehow corrupting the youth of America. The funniest and most over-the-top one, though, has to be the one about the Smurfs.
They're depicted as blue with black lips. And you know what happens to you when you die? You turn blue and your lips turn black.
Smurfs has gone occultic.
Very much so.
Smurfs carry a homosexual connotation in that most of them are male.
I believe so.
So when you apply all of this to the House of the Devil, it makes a lot of sense now. West is playing into that paranoia and telling a tale of what it would be like if just one of the stories happened to be true. What if an innocent woman who doesn't even like kids,
You don't even like kids anyway.
Yeah, I guess.
was forcefully impregnated by the devil himself and had to deal with the repercussions that went with that? You know, what if my kid makes a bad decision and becomes consumed by a cult? It's paranoia at its finest. And my God, does Samantha make bad decisions. In fact, I don't think she makes one good decision throughout the entire film. This is most certainly a specific kind of fear for that kind of parent in the 80s. When listening to the audio commentary for the film, Ty West says something to the effect that his mother was often afraid when he was a kid that he would be abducted or corrupted by devil worshippers. So this really does make a lot of sense when you stop to think about it.
Yeah, there's a lot of weirdos out there.
There's also this hot take out there that the film is also about the right to choose. You know, pro-life versus pro-choice, because the protagonist is clearly not a fan of kids.
You don't even like kids anyway.
And is forced against her will to have one by those that are now forcing her to do so. From the cult in the basement, to the devil that saved her from killing herself, to the hospital that is keeping her and her baby alive, regardless of her decisions. I think that's a pretty interesting take. The film certainly does deal with motherhood and different mother figures that are in it, but I don't think that's what Ti West was going for at all. As already stated, this film came out in 2009 when movies didn't really go into deep metaphors like they do all the time. Not to mention, if you listen to Ti West in interviews or read his press kit, there's nothing in there that would suggest that this is what he was going for. It's kind of like when people say The Shining was really about the faking of the moon landing, or a metaphor for how the Native Americans were mistreated. It's fun to think about, but at the end of the day, it's a bit of a stretch. I do absolutely love how this movie is put together though. I love the dance scene, how it's very reminiscent of The Breakfast Club. I love how it foreshadows different elements, such as how Megan says the pizza tastes funny in the beginning of the film, and then later in the film the pizza tastes funny again because this time it's drugged. I also like how the film will subvert your expectations. For example, in the middle of the film, Megan gets shot in the head by the sun, right? And her head just explodes, and it's the most graphic scene in the whole movie. And you look at it and go, damn, she's dead. And then later in the movie, Sam takes that same gun, blows her own brains out, and you think, well, there's no way she's coming back. She's gotta be dead. The movie primed us that that gun shooting you in the head is gonna be an explosive mess and you're dead. Maybe it's like a hollow point, who knows. But the movie does subvert that expectation because sure enough, one scene later, she's in a coma and she's in the hospital bed. So I like that. I like the misdirect. And I just like the overall feel of the film. Like I said, it's shot on 16mm, so it has that 1980s look to it. The title cards are pretty cool and how they freeze frame. Or in the end, how you have this like suspenseful freeze frame of a cliffhanger, and the credits just kind of roll over it while you're still looking at the photo. It wasn't even trying to like imply that a sequel was coming. It was just meant to leave you with this uneasy feeling like, we're not done yet, and you just have to like look at that freeze frame. I love that. They don't do that in horror movies anymore, and it's kind of a great little trick. So I have to commend Ti West for doing a lot of these little notions that you just don't see, even today, when 80s throwbacks are in vogue. And the lunar eclipse itself, which to me is like a ticking time bomb. I think the lunar eclipse is a representative of time, and how time is running out. All the characters are working against time. You know, Sam needs to get the money by Monday, or she can't pay her rent. The Ullmans have to get this sacrifice together by tonight during the eclipse, or it's not gonna work. And then at the end of the movie, we have the newscast talking about the lunar eclipse, and they say it ended abruptly. It ended way quicker to everybody's like shock, which in itself could be a metaphor about how, you know, we're all chasing time, but then life throws you a curveball and things don't work out the way you think they're going to do. You know, your life can change drastically while you're chasing the carrot. And I don't know, I think there's something to that, but I love all these little nuances and all these reflections that we see throughout the film. Every time I watch it, I pull something a little bit differently out of the film, and I like that. It doesn't beat you over the head, it doesn't spoon feed you. You know, you can kind of imprint different things onto this movie, and it's still a good flick. Some people say it's a little slow, and I totally agree and understand where they're coming from, but I like that. I like that it feels a little bit more authentic. I feel like I'm actually there, like I'm watching a security camera. You know, there's a certain voyeuristic quality to this film, kind of like Psycho, where you feel like you're looking through that peek hole and you're like, maybe you're the killer. You know, it's like the killer's point of view, without being obnoxious by actually showing the killer, you know, peeking behind the bush or something like that. So, very cool, very atmospheric, very startling and uncomfortable. But it's very effective because at the end of the day, it's just a girl walking around a house. It shouldn't be that creepy, but it really is. But what did you think of The House of the Devil? Was there anything that I missed? Be sure to comment down below, and also I have some other Ti West films right here that I already covered, and I'm going to be doing more going up ahead, so if you want to see more of that, be sure to give the video a thumbs up and subscribe. Make sure you ring that bell so that you don't miss them, because YouTube has a way of just burying all the videos all the way down, and it's just... It's the worst. But let me know what you think. Until next time, guys, thank you so much for watching. I have been John here on Birds Reviews. You just got burned, and we will see you next time. Why don't they do what they say what they mean? One thing leads to another. It's gonna be stuck on my head for a couple days now. It might be stuck on your head. I might have thrown it your way, and if that's annoying, I apologize. I hate when people do that, so... I'll see you next time, guys.